Okay, we have a slide up there that will give you the where you can access some of this information, contact information. We'll leave this up so that you can write down whatever you like. Now we'd like to open it up for questions from the audience for any of our speakers. Yes, in the back.
And my questions are for Mr. Duffy for CPHD. And they relate to transparency and accountability to individual members of the community, such as myself and my neighbors. You referred to a report related to a site plan application, and I would like to know how that will be available online to members of the community. And you referred to decisions on site plans being made by you or your office as opposed to the manager. And I would like to know how those application approvals will be available online. And then if your office, your department works really quickly, as I understood it, certain site plan applications won't go to the board. They'll be, if they're handled quickly enough. So again, my question is as to accountability and transparency to the local residents, how those decisions will be made available online, starting with a copy of the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. Several questions, and let me try to take them in order. Please?
I said that they were short.
They were short, but they were good. They were great. You heard me talk about community engagement and being transparent, and we mean it. In terms of the report, just want to go back and look at what we do today. About a year ago, we started to create a project web page for site plan special exception applications. And it was part of our new website, both for the department and for the county. So if you go to projects, you can pull down a page related to site plans. And for example, an application that was heard by the Planning Commission last evening related to Pentagon Center, which changes the phase development site plan and a site plan. There's a page there that provides a full description of the application. It provides links to the material that's submitted, and it provides a letter. And in the last, I'd say 8 to 12 months, we, as the county manager, has been accepting, and I'll use the word accepting, the site plan applications for completeness. We prepare a basic letter that to the applicant indicates that. We post that letter on the website as well. All other correspondence that we receive as well go on that. I will say that we can do a much better job of that to ensure that everything related to a project, including all the application material, becomes on the website as well. So in terms of providing it to the community, to residents, and to other interested parties, we will use our web page for projects to include all that information. So when it's accepted, when commission meetings, site plan review committee meetings are scheduled, reports from that process, they're all going to be part of that website. So we're going to load it up and ensure that all that information is available online. And so we've started that, but we'll improve it. In terms of the report, again, I indicate that we have started to provide a letter that's a synopsis of the application, the determination of acceptance today by the county manager, and some basic information about what may be some outstanding issues related to zoning. We want to convert that letter and also put the new report online that provides a full range of conclusions. I won't say recommendations, but conclusions in terms of how that plan, based on our preliminary findings of this new concept review I've talked about, how they conform with an approved plan, how they relate or conform with zoning provisions. Are there specific site plan related issues that deal with access, deal with a range of physical planning and engineering considerations that we want to review through the public review process. So we'll develop that report, have a format. We'll certainly be reviewing that report in a concept form with many in this room, certainly with the planning commissions. Everyone have a chance to see how we're going to approach that before we put it into practice. We would like to complete that work by the end of the year so that we can begin to submit those reports. And in terms of, I think you asked about the acceptance, the county manager's acceptance today, and having that acceptance now by the director of the department, it'll be the same process, The acceptance report will be reviewed with the director. It'll certainly be considered by the county manager as well in terms of their communication, and so it will also appear online. So I'm not sure we can be more transparent than that, but if there's something else we can do, we'll certainly listen. Hope it answers your questions.
I was also looking for like a list of, you know, if there are 5 projects in which reports are issued, whatever you call it, to various developers, whether there'll be a place where you can see CPHD application approvals so that you can look in one place and see that there's been a report for Glebe Road and the same with, you mentioned that some won't even now have to go to the county board, and whether or not there'll be a link online where you can see that a site plan in 4 different parts of the county are not going to be going to the board, but in fact, or to the planning commission, blah, 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 but in fact are going forward.
I got it. No, I got it. It's very clear. Thank you for clarifying that. Let me just say this. All of the site plan applications will have to go to the county board. We're not proposing an administrative review approval of a site plan application. We think there are some classes that don't involve specific changes or amendments to either previously approved site plans or new site plans that might involve a minor change in use or density or intensity that we think can go either through a single meeting with the commission and onto the county board, but the county board will always have to approve them. But what Ms. O'Connell suggested is a good thing and something we're doing today with our new website. And Samia Bird, who's here, who manages our site plan review process, updates this on a monthly basis. You can go, there is a report that we file, and you can go online and look at the entire county, and through technology, you can see where site plans are currently active or come in all across the county. You can click on that, and it'll give you a profile of what the application is. But what we'll also do is link you to that page I described where you can find all that documentation reports. So at one glance, you'll be able to see all of the active site plans. The second thing that's important, what's the status of some of those approved site plans that are currently that have been approved recently as well? And we'll be able to provide a list of those. So we're going to try to be as transparent as possible. I hope that answers your questions. Thank you, Ms. O'Connell.
Hi, my question is for David Christile. For the renovation project at the affordable housing units at Clarendon Court Apartments, where can we find a timeline of the renovations being completed, as well as how will it affect some of the businesses like a daycare provider on site?
Good question. I'm sorry, you're talking about Clarendon Courts? Yeah, that's a development that was repurchased by McCormick Barron, and they're going through the financing and renovation process right now. I don't have the specific timeline, but if you, I can give you my card and you can email me, and I'm happy to provide that information. And the second part of your question was about the daycare?
Well, there's a daycare provider on site, and so really it's just a question that some of the residents are not able to get answers to from management at this time because it's unknown.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to talk to you about that, because I think we want to make sure, again, in terms of these processes, they're complicated, but I think our job in terms of communication is helping the communication. And in these situations, we want folks, if there's tenants that have issues or community folks that have issues with a certain development project, usually want them to go to get the information from the applicant developer themselves. If we can help facilitate that, we're happy to do that. Thanks.
Also for David Christille.
Don't leave, David.
So you talked about the Affordable Housing Master Plan. I think the board is scheduled to vote on that on Saturday, the 19th. But there is another piece to it called the implementation framework. And looking at your slide, you have existing and potential tools. And is it correct to believe that these potential tools, which have not already been approved, will come back before the board or there'll be a process where we can, give input about whether or not we think that's a legitimate way of doing things? And if that's true, could you flag those as to what you think are existing versus what are sort of to be determined?
Sure. So the short answer in terms of process, a lot of the tools are administrative tools that we've created over a period of time, and some of those I was back, I think Susan Bell in the back, there was the Affordable Housing Investment Fund that was actually set up, and we had board approval for that, and there's been tools since then that have also gone to the board. But the short answer is yes, there will be a process. If there's any new tools or actually tweaks or amendments or changes to existing tools, there'd be a community process that those would go through. And I guess if we can pull up the slide of the tools, we can kind of highlight some of those. Keep going. Right there. I guess I think I'll pick on one of my favorites, one that's gotten talked about a lot. There's something called the Accessory Dwelling Unit Ordinance that back in the day, which wasn't too long ago, the intent of that ordinance was, again, there's what we're trying to do in this county, at least I think we're trying to do since I've been here, is really how do you expand housing options throughout the county? And that means in the metro corridors, and that means in non-metro corridors. And accessory dwelling units was an idea that says, look, if we can help folks age in place, if we can kind of help existing units, be created in a less dense area, we'll try that. And so there was an ordinance that was adopted back in, I think it was 2008, if I'm not mistaken, and that went through a fairly lengthy community process. And I guess in my opinion, and I think the facts justify this, is that we got the ordinance adopted, but over those, I guess it's 7 years, I think we've got about 9 or 10 of those units have been created. And so that tells us that even though the intent was to try and expand housing options, in that particular case it didn't work. So I think one of the tools we're going to go back to, or at least we're recommending to go back to, is that we look at that ordinance, and is there a way that we can, and I'm not going to put a noun to it, but can we look at that ordinance in a way and make amendments to it so that it actually creates more accessory dwelling units in the future? And that'll be a process that, like most of the processes, it'll go out pretty far and wide, and there'll be commission, there'll be staff, there'll be community folks. Hopefully, you'll be involved in this particular review and work. And then hopefully at the end of that process, there will be there'll be a recommendation to make some tweaks to that, and then hopefully the result of that is if we can implement it, then we'll get more accessory dwelling units in the future rather than less.
Hi, my name is John. I'm with Tradition Homes. My question is for Mr. Cover or Mr. Amiri. You had mentioned the review times to be like 10 to 15 days for residential or commercial projects. I'm wondering if that time frame is also going to apply to DES, and as well as payment and permit acceptance.
I think we said we are going to move towards that goal by the time of the implementation of the new permitting system. We haven't made any promises, and the DES folks are here because it really requires a lot of insight look into is our staffing model correct? Is it are we extremely efficient as it might be? So it was easier to accomplish that during zoning But I can tell you that in zoning right now for new single families is 10 business days, for commercial news are 15. That time frame is what we are maintaining currently in zoning and ISD, but I think we have a lot of work to do in order to bring the entire regulatory process, and I don't know what those time frames may be. Maybe it's something longer that makes better sense, or shorter. But we are working on it towards a common goal. Whatever that is, we'll find out and we'll communicate that.
Louis, I don't know if you wanted to add additional thoughts to that from DES's perspective?
Louis Araya, Chief Development Services in DES. One of the problems that we have with fast reviews of elements that are associated with either the building or the zoning review of a building permit is the land disturbance activity permit or stormwater quality review. The county is one of the few jurisdictions, if not the only jurisdiction right now in the state of Virginia, that is now reviewing all land disturbance activities at level 3 of the Chesapeake Bay Protection Ordinance mandated by the state and by the federal government. That review continues to pile on more regulations, more review, more intense engineering. Some of the engineering firms that are maybe represented here can tell you that we must regulate items in stormwater quality review down to a square foot of dimension on a site. Those go back and forth between engineers and reviewers quite a few times during the review. It's all a civil plan review element. We must meet regulatory requirements to meet our permitting rights to discharge waters into the Chesapeake Bay in Arlington. We get audited every year. Part of that audit requires us to provide the state with our review format for plan review, stormwater quality review. So those elements is always associated with the issuance of a building permit that typically involves large land disturbance, does require more time. And that is why we always get the blame, meaning DES gets the blame for taking the longest or coming in at a late stage of a plan review, building permit review, to add on all these requirements that sometimes are new, even to some engineering firms who haven't done something in Arlington at level 3 yet, to find out, hey, you got to do more plan review, back and forth a few times. That being said, we will work with the resources that it will take to shorten that review, to bring it down to the expectation that this process and this proposal will take us to, and to try to meet those guidelines similar to what we have in our present review of civil engineering plans, which a number of engineering firms here know all about. It is time-specific to reviewers, time-specific for the agencies, and the only thing that matters after that is the return time that it takes to have the engineers to submit plans, applicants to submit plans. That time we do not control. That adds to a review time. And unfortunately, it is very difficult to submit a land disturbance permit or a civil plan that goes through at least 2 reviews. The first review gets it in for a formal review, then you have to work out the details that go back and forth, because every single site that is submitted, whether it's a building permit or a large, huge development, requires specific elements of the plan to be reviewed for very specific numbers that are used in stormwater quality reviews and approvals. So that takes time. We're going to work with resources and staff and whatever it takes to make that plan or this process work like it does with civil engineering plan, where everything's done online, communications directly with engineers, and resolving all those problems, not through control centers or people, but directly between reviewers and engineers. I hope that gives you a little bit of a picture of that.
Other questions? Oh, come on. There we go. We solved all of your problems today?
Despite my usual shyness. This is either for Mr. Duffy's CPHD or for zoning, and it relates to the post-site plan approval process. And to make the question easier, we'll talk about a new site plan, so it's totally new. After site plan is approved, there are requests by the applicant developer for some changes. Sometimes in the past, those changes have been treated quote unquote administratively and often decided within zoning, I believe. And some are determined to be minor site plan amendments that go back to the board. So with the changes to CPHD now approving the applications, is there also going to be that function of post-site plan approval amendments? Will that rest with CPHD or zoning in terms of what makes an administrative change versus a minor site plan amendment? Is that clear?
It is. Thank you again, Ms. O'Connell. Just for everyone here is not familiar with the site plan process, once the county board has approved the site plan and all the conditions, applicants have a period of 90 days to submit what's called the post 4.1 application. It's really the plans that meet or are consistent with all the final conditions and revisions that the county board may have recommended. And those are received by the zoning office, and they come into the zoning administrator. There is a provision in the zoning ordinance that does allow the zoning administrator to make determinations of whether or not an amendment, it might be the movement of a window or a door, maybe a minor change in materials, or it allows for the zoning administrator to consider whether those changes can be approved administratively. What is done on a routine basis is, since a site plan is reviewed and facilitated, the review process facilitated by the planning division, the zoning administrator will contact and forward those to our office for review, and our chief architect, urban designer, conducts many of those reviews. They're submitted then to me, and I'll make a recommendation to our director and to the zoning administrator for approval. So they go through several steps of review, but ultimately it's the zoning administrator that has the ultimate authority. Those changes often involve landscape improvements too, where after the approval's been made, there may have been some conditions regarding landscape improvements, and we have a really outstanding landscape architect, urban design professional who assists with those reviews as well. So we coordinate very closely with the zoning administrator, and again, we do have authority within great limits, not involving use, or change in density or intensity. Those require site plan amendments that go back to the county board. But if they involve materials, basic architectural features, landscape features, a number of very minor improvements, we can deal with those administratively. Norma, anything else?
I just want to comment on how I make a decision or determination of whether I can approve it or whether it needs to go back to the board. Basically, I have to adhere to the conditions that the county board has set on the site plan. Before I approve anything, no matter what the recommendation is from anyone, I look at the condition to see if the language of that condition allows me to do an administrative approval. If that language does not allow me to do that, I won't do it. I will send it to the board. Or sometimes I will negotiate with planning to look at, okay, maybe we can approve a piece of this administratively, but this piece does not allow an administrative approval. So it's not just a rubber stamp by the zoning administrator. It is an actual thorough review of the condition. I also, when I receive a recommendation to approve an administrative change, I also look to see if I need to have any more review. In addition to planning, there's a lot of times if it has a traffic impact or traffic flow or something like that, I will also send it to DES for their review. So we're very careful with how we approve administrative changes.
We have a question back here.
Thank you. I'm Carrie Johnson, Free Radical. I commend all the efforts you're making to make more information available online to process things digitally, and all the progress that you've committed to here today, in addition to what you've already done. I want to suggest two other kinds of communication to bear in mind. One is that there are some people in the county who are not totally in the 21st century yet, who do not routinely do everything online. In addition to whatever gets posted, you'll still have to do outreach of many sorts to get to those other elements of the community in a number of languages, in a number of kinds of circumstances and places of communication, and I just trust that you will remember that. The second is that regarding by right projects, and I have to confess an interest here, the house next door to me is being torn down as we speak. When you are expediting approval of by right projects, it would be helpful if you could also think about the basic information that the neighbors and others affected by those projects are otherwise going to ask you about, and make that available. For instance, what can you expect about a construction project on your block in terms of timing, in terms of traffic disruption, and so on and so forth, the operating environment that neighbors are going to have to put up with, and just post that somewhere as a kind of one-stop information. Similarly, some of the basic parameters of by right projects that you get questions about all the time from people who don't know them. If there's a way to consolidate that information, it would be helpful. The kind of explanation that Louis Araya just gave about the new and very complicated stormwater requirements, and particularly their impact on trees, which I know people are finding out the hard way. The more of that you can put up in terms of community information, spread it around through civic associations and so on, I think particularly as approvals are moving faster, you're going to get fewer complaints. Thanks.
Other questions?
Thank you. My name is Scott Pedowitz. I have a question primarily, I guess, for Chikwe. On the neighborhood development, you mentioned working with small businesses and trying to get a retail and commercial mix in neighborhoods. What is the current thinking and approach to retail mix in our higher density neighborhoods, particularly having the sort of services that residents would consume mixed in with the more sort of typical bar and restaurant type of businesses that we see through our high density corridors?
Well, that's a good question. It goes a little bit beyond what we do in neighborhood services. I know Arlington Economic Development's been working on a retail study, and there are various sector plans that my colleague Bob Duffy may want to speak to regarding kind of the high density Roslyn-Boston corridor and Columbia Pike.
I mean, it's a great question, because with a growing residential population in our metro corridors, ensuring that we can enable and permit the widest possible range of retailers and services is important. Several things. One, we've got our colleagues from economic development here, Jill Griffin in particular, who over several years of her life worked on the retail plan and strategy and did an outstanding job, and the county board adopted that update of our retail plan in July. I take a look at that and how it looks at each of our transit villages and each of our transit corridors in defining where retail and services, where we want to encourage them. You know, in the past, we were so focused on retail and street character that, we were requiring certain types of retail everywhere. And I think we've recognized there has to be a better balance of retail and services. And the work that Jill and A did in developing that plan, I think, is gotten us there. We also worked in tandem with our new comprehensive update of the zoning ordinance to completely retool. And Debbie Albert, who works on our zoning amendments, worked tirelessly to ensure that our new zoning standards and use tables recognize the changing retail environment we have today. So she's done an outstanding job, and so those two things now work hand in glove. I think we've also got to continue to look at and work with tenants and the development community and property owners, ensuring that we can support retail tenancy moving through the permitting process. And there are some things that I know our director has given us a priority to work towards as well. So it's a great question, and I think I'd look at the retail plan and strategy. I think it gives you a good idea of the future of retailing in Arlington County.
Going once? Okay. Alrighty. Steve, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you all for coming out. Hopefully you've got a lot of good information. Any questions, please contact us, or any clarification of what we presented. More information will be coming out, like particularly in the site plan review. We've got a number of things that are going to take a couple of months to kick into gear, but then we'll keep you posted on that. I think that's pretty much it. Any other questions? If not, thank you very much for coming out, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.
If you had colleagues who didn't have an opportunity to come today, this morning, we will have this entire presentation, both the PowerPoint slides, audio, and the visual recording of the presentations available no later than Monday on our website. Thank you.